You're listening to the opening title themes of Robot Monster, 1953. A real piece of shit. Good music. Ding, ding. Hey everybody, welcome to Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts. I'm your host, Michael Lucht, Warrior Poet. Today is a weird one. Just preface this by saying that I'm not the most scientifically with it cat. Don't know a lot about technology. I don't know a lot about physics. I took biology in college, and didn't really do too well at that either. But today we're talking about a scientist, physicist. What else? Man, this guy has a list of disciplines as long as your arm. He is a karate man. And a lieutenant colonel in the Army. Today, we're talking about Lieutenant Colonel, quote-unquote, Dr. Tom Bearden. Now, this dude is on some next-level weird science, high strangeness, and I dig it. Once again, I don't understand a lot of it, but the parts that I do understand are mind-boggling. It's something so singular in its overall rate of sheer boggle thresholds, I just had to share it with everyone. And part of me hopes that one of our wonderful listeners is capable of making enough sense out of it all that they can eventually explain it to me, like the wide-eyed child that I am. Luckily, it already makes a hell of a lot more sense than Time Cube, so let's dig into it. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Bearden, U.S. Army, retired. Was a nuclear engineer, military analyst, and pioneering theorist in the fields of scalar electromagnetics.
Because I'm a karate man, all right? Karate man bruise on the inside. They don't show their weaknesses. Yeah.
Psychotronics and paranormal phenomenon. That's the big one. His work, often controversial, quote-unquote controversial, has significantly influenced alternative science communities. Bearden served over 24 years in the U.S. Army, specializing in air defense systems, nuclear weapons employment, technical intelligence, and computerized war games. Isn't that pretty much what it all is now? He earned a Master of Science degree in nuclear engineering from Georgia Tech and was a graduate of the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff College. Post-retirement, he worked as a senior scientist at Kolsa Corporation, never heard of him, focusing on advanced electromagnetic theories and technologies. Bearden was instrumental in developing the concept of scalar electromagnetics, drawing upon the early 20th century work of E.T. Whittaker. Okay? He posited that conventional electromagnetic theory was incomplete and advocated for a revised understanding that included scalar potentials, hypothetical fields that could explain various anomalous phenomenon. Among his notable inventions was the motionless electromagnetic generator, or MEG, which he claimed could extract usable energy from the vacuum, a concept often referred to as free energy or zero point. Bearden also explored the intersection of electromagnetics and biology, proposing mechanisms by which electromagnetic fields could influence biological systems. Now this is where, this is the shit I love. Okay. Psychotronics, it's a big thing here. He's written a couple books, but the one that we're going to focus on today is called The Excalibur Briefing. It's basically his whole outline of the psychotronic causes behind paranormal phenomenon. Now, this dude, I have a feeling, I know some people in like the UFO study field know this guy and have like heard of him and looked into his stuff. I don't know. He's still kind of esoteric, and I have a feeling that this dude, despite being poo-pooed upon by mainstream science, I think some of his theories have a little merit to them. What I can decipher from it. Once again, I am not a smart man. I'm a smart dumb guy. We'll go with that. But the Excalibur briefing. In it, Bearden presents a comprehensive framework that seeks to unify mind and matter through advanced physics, particularly focusing on psychotronics, the study of the interaction between consciousness and energy fields. The key concepts that he presents are psychotronics and psychoenergetics. Also, keep in mind, this dude was a straight-up, balls-out Cold Warrior. He is all about some, like, the Russians have this shit. We need to look into it. We need to watch out for it. And just the potential scenarios that he runs through. Some of them are, my God, they are, once again, the boggle thresholds. So yeah, psychotronics and psychoenergetics. Bearden introduces psychotronics as a field that merges psychology and electronics, aiming to understand how consciousness can influence physical systems. So, mind over matter. He suggests that the mind can interact with matter through mechanisms not yet recognized by mainstream science, things that basically consciousness studies are just now coming around to. Another big thing with this dude, scalar electromagnetics. Building on Whittaker's work, Bearden discusses scalar waves, hypothetical electromagnetic waves that can transmit energy without the movement of charge. He theorizes that these waves could be harnessed for various applications, including communication and weaponry. Now here's one of my favorites. Tulpoidal phenomenon, as in tulpa. Tulpoidal phenomenon. Drawing from Jungian psychology, Bearden explores the idea that collective human consciousness can manifest physical entities or phenomena such as UFOs, cryptids, and apparitions. He refers to these manifestations as tulpoids, suggesting they are temporary materializations resulting from collective mental focus. This is the super woo shit. We're going to get into that, especially later. Military applications. Bearden expresses concern over the potential militarization of psychotronic technologies. He alleges that certain nations, Russia, have developed weapons capable of including diseases or psychological effects remotely using scalar electromagnetic fields. Basically, they can transmit diseases into your body, he posits at some point. He wants to basically have a complete reevaluation of physical laws. He challenges the completeness of classical logic and physics, advocating for a new paradigm that accommodates phenomena currently deemed, quote-unquote, paranormal. Bearden argues that existing scientific frameworks are insufficient to explain the full spectrum of human experience and consciousness. I can dig it. Bearden's work, while not widely accepted within the mainstream scientific circles, boy, that's a goddamn understatement, it's inspired ongoing discussions and research within alternative science and fringe physics communities. His attempts to bridge the gap between consciousness and physical reality continue to provoke thought and debate. Provoke's a good word. Now, one of his main concepts that he keeps coming back to, especially in his book, The Excalibur Briefing, is something called the Zarg entity. Z-A-R-G. This is what drew me to this dude. This is the concept. I was like, what is this? And I had to search it down some more. So he defines it as Zarg. Zarg is basically the collective human consciousness considered as a mind and a living entity. It is at least 4 billion dimensional. See, this is so far beyond my comprehension already. Like, just, but I love it. I love it. Okay. Since it has as many dimensions as human stages, each human is regarded as a single cellular stage in this entity. The psychokinetic power of such a linked mind is proportional to an exponential of the number of individual stages. Now, I assume by stages he means people in general. That's what I think he's saying. Like, each person, you know, each singular consciousness makes up a cell of Zarg, I guess. I think that's what he's getting at. Thus, Zarg's psychokinetic power is so great that it has a central control over space and time. and largely prescribes, maintains, and stabilizes the laws of nature, aka the laws of physics, and the reality in which we live. Conflict between large groups of humans constitutes unresolved conflict in this great unconsciousness. Keep in mind, this is Cold War era. This is got a little schizophrenia, a little brain syzygy thing going on. And this generates symbolic dreams, much as a human dreams strange, emotional, symbolic dreams due to the unresolved conflict in his or her personal unconscious mind. However, because of its vast psychokinetic power, Zarg materializes or partially materializes its symbolic dreams, resulting in tolpoids. Waves of these tolpoidal materializations thus represent strong human conflict or threats on the large scale. Such waves can be dream analyzed to discover the correlate that is generating the symbology by straightforward dream analysis techniques. In olden times, part of this was known, and wise men were employed to analyze and interpret the strange induced dreams of the king, who was the center of a power of a nation, and the paranormal phenomena appearing near him. The ancients knew the import of signs and wonders, quote unquote, and what they portended, but this metapsychological knowledge has been largely ridiculed and lost by present materialistic Western science. So, it's a bit to digest, I understand. Just roll with me on it. So, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas E. Bearden introduced the concept of the Zarg entity as a metaphorical representation of the collective unconscious of humanity. The idea is rooted in his exploration of psychotronics and scalar electromagnetics. Psychotronics, I've a fairly decent grasp on. Scalar electromagnetics, no clue, no idea. Please let me know if you understand, and like I said, explain it to me like I'm 5. Particularly as discussed in his work, the aforementioned Excalibur briefing. Bearden coined the term Zarg to encapsulate the notion of a unified, species-wide consciousness. He found the phrase collective unconsciousness or human species mind cumbersome and opted for Zarg because it's got that pop, it's got that zazz. It even starts with a Z. It's more concise. The name itself is a blend of the exclamations zounds and arg, reflecting his astonishment upon conceptualizing humanity as a superorganism of a psychic nature. Basically, in his framework, Zarg is not merely a philosophical construct, but a tangible entity facilitated by quantum potentials. No idea. He posited that all humans are linked through a species quantum potential. A concept derived from scalar electromagnetics and the works of E.T. Whittaker. This interconnectedness implies that individual minds are components of a larger collective consciousness. Okay. I can I'm wrapping my mind around this. Bearden's theory suggests that Zarg plays a role in various psychotronic and paranormal phenomena. For instance, he believed that collective human emotions and thoughts could manifest physically, leading to events such as UFO sightings or unexplained atmospheric occurrences. These manifestations are seen as materializations of the collective unconscious influenced by the species-wide quantum potential. In one account, Bearden describes a phenomenon resembling a giant luminous jellyfish observed over a Soviet city, which we'll go over in just a moment. He interpreted this as a symbolic materialization of Zarg, serving as a warning or response to psychotronic activities. Such events underscore his belief in the tangible impact of collective consciousness on the physical world. Bearden envisioned Zarg as a potential force for global transformation, except when he talks about the Russians basically poking at it through psychotronic means, and it responds in a non-favorable fashion. He theorized that by consciously engaging with this collective entity, humanity could achieve a higher state of awareness and unity. This engagement would involve the development of technologies or practices that facilitate direct communication with Zarg, potentially leading to advancements in healing, understanding, and global cooperation. Essentially a technological form of what, tons of meditative practices have been trying to do, or, claim that they do at some point if you keep up with the practice, blah, blah, blah. However, he also warned of the dangers associated with misusing psychotronic technologies, which could disrupt the balance of the collective unconscious and lead to detrimental consequences, psychotronic consequences. Thus, he advocated for responsible exploration and application of these concepts to harness their positive potential. In summary, Tom Bearden's concept of the Zarg entity, it's going to get me every time, represents his attempt to articulate a unified field of human consciousness interconnected through quantum potentials. And by exploring this idea, he sought to bridge the gap between mind and matter, offering a framework to essentially understand and hopefully, potentially, harness the collective unconsciousness for the betterment of all mankind. Now, the aforementioned jellyfish sighting is the infamous-ish in UFO lore. It's the Petrozavodsk UFO sighting, and I'm probably Petrozavodsk UFO sighting, September 20th, 1977. In the early morning, September 20th, 1977, a remarkable and widely witnessed phenomena occurred over Petrozavodsk, a city in Soviet Karelia, I believe is how you say it. At around 4 a.m., a large glowing mass of light appeared in the sky. And there are pictures of this, and I'll probably, I don't know, I really want to put a picture of Tom Bearden, because I just want everyone to know what he looks like, but you can find pictures of this jellyfish incident. It's quite breathtaking, actually. A large glowing mass of light appeared in the sky. Described by the Soviet news agency TASS as resembling a quote-unquote shining jellyfish with luminous beams extending downward like rain, the display caused some physical effects. Windows were broken or punctured where the light beams contacted them. Haven't heard of that part before. As the light dimmed, it transformed into a bright hemisphere that drifted toward Lake Onega. Afterward, gray clouds appeared with a red-centered, semicircular opening persisting for at least 10 minutes. The event was witnessed by many citizens and reported widely, forcing Soviet authorities to acknowledge it publicly. Uh-oh! So they weren't happy with that. Bearden interprets this event as a materialized symbolic expression of Zarg, the collective unconscious of humanity. He suggests it was a psychotronic backlash, a kind of metaphysical or energetic retaliation triggered by the USSR's own use of psychotronic weapons. The imagery, a jellyfish, all-seeing eye, red center and gray clouds, etc., symbolically represents psychological and energetic retribution, pain, i.e. jellyfish tentacles and their sting. Feel the sting! Surveillance or divine reckoning, the eye in the sky, the hemisphere, the death and destruction rained down by a gray, gloomy cloud with a red center. It's all very, it is doom and gloom energy or imagery, but at the same time, I don't know. I think jellyfish, I think like pretty and slightly hypnotic, and that's just me. I don't know. There are different ways to interpret the symbology, of course. While some official Soviet sources, I'm sure, aren't they all official back in the day, including TASS, speculated it was caused by a meteor or possibly the launch of the Cosmos 955 satellite, Bearden argues the scope, visual features, and public impact of the event far exceeded anything a rocket launch would normally produce. I have looked into some of these rocket launches that caused the jellyfish image, like, I hesitate to say apparitions, I don't know, imagery in the sky, like made from clouds and atmospheric disturbance. It is a thing that happens, but apparently this particular incident was nowhere near the launching of this satellite. He views it as a real energetic manifestation deeply tied to the collective psychic state of humanity and indicative of a larger metaphysical force at play. Now, he made it at least one of his number one jams in life to study Soviet psychotronic weapons. And he also, in this book, published a list of the potential. I'm assuming that he, being from a military background, would know that this is stuff that was confirmed that the glorious Socialist Soviet Republic had in their hands at the time, and presumably still do. So he asserts that the Soviet Union developed or explored a wide range of psychotronic and scalar-based technologies, which he believes extend into nearly every area of military and energetic research, and these include electromagnetic field canceller, suppressing or used to suppress existing electromagnetic fields, Electron current canceller. Interrupts electron flow in circuitry or organisms. That's slightly terrifying. The death radiator or de-inceptor. Presumably a device to cause lethal effects remotely. This is the, well, death ray. They could also be used to broadcast diseases of various kinds into people, cancer, etc., according to some of his more complicated work. If you can find the Excalibur briefing, read it. There's all kinds of mind-blowing things in there. Once again, I'm probably overusing this term already, but boggle thresholds. It is beyond all of that. Free energy generator, scalar-based energy device for tapping vacuum energy or zero point. The psychotronic bomb, which is a cool rap group name, I guess maybe. I don't know. A weapon exploiting mind-influencing energies. There's brain link, which sounds really familiar. Links two minds or a mind to a machine interface. Brain probe remotely scans or reads mental content. Okay, mind reading machine. Disease radiator ray. Yes. Okay. Projects disease inducing frequencies. My God, that is terrifying. Emotion radiator ray projects mood altering energy fields. Okay, you can see that. Anti-submarine systems, psychotronic enhancements for sub detection or attack. Teleporters as a prototype. Early stage matter transmission. Actually, I've come across more weird parapsychological Cold War literature that says that China is actually far ahead in the game when it comes to teleportation science. But that's another episode. That's something down the line. Let's see. Force generators. Creates invisible energetic barriers. So force fields. Orthoframe generators. Possibly manipulates space-time orientation. Oh my God. Okay. Quark, anti-quark rays. Advanced subatomic manipulation weapons. Distant telepathy, aka non-local mental communication. Okay, like machine telepathy. That's, yeah. Nuclear radiation inhibitors. Dampen radiation output. Okay, that's useful. Mental implantation. Plants ideas or memories into minds. A lot of this, if you look into the targeted individual subculture, and man, I feel for a lot of these people. My God, just the inescapable fear and dread and terror that you must go through living as such a person in that situation, whatever the cause of it may be. My God. ABM systems, mid-course and terminal. These are enhanced missile defense phases. Okay, dematerializer shields. Conceivably remove objects from physical perception or matter state. Holy shit. Okay, disintegration rays, essentially, or maybe make them invisible. Sounds like you do that too. Sweeps for nuclear debris. Scalar cleansing of nuclear residues. That sounds useful for everyone. AAA systems. Anti-aircraft applications. Using psychotronics. Holy shit. Okay. Anti-satellite systems. Psychotronic satellite countermeasures. Tesla effect weapons. Uses scalar/Tesla principles for directed energy. Death rays again. A lot of death rays. Earthquake generators. Well, we all know everyone has those already. They induce seismic activity remotely. Anti-vehicular systems. Disabling machinery or vehicles. Weather control systems. Once again. Okay, hey, come on. Who do you think you're kidding here? We're old hands at this point now, right? Bearden believes these technologies go beyond conventional physics and include manipulation of the mind, emotions, matter, energy, and even the weather using scalar and psychotronic principles. He concludes with in his book, The Excalibur Briefing, with a sweeping metaphysical argument linking scalar physics, psychology, and esoteric consciousness. So, yeah. Basically, once again, breaking down Zarg, each human being is a cell in the mind-body of Zarg. Zarg's quote-unquote conscious mind is fragmented into all human minds, making it inherently disassociative, a classical hallmark of psychosis. We're talking schizophrenia on a on a exponentially vast scale. That's us. That's us. That's humanity at large. Zarg is thus described by Bearden as insane, though vastly intelligent and symbolically expressive. So, I don't know. Daniel Johnson or whatever that musician's name is. That's what it makes me think of. I don't know. It's multidimensional consciousness. Zarg's unconsciousness is not truly unconscious. It's multiple conscious or multiplied conscious, but beyond the grasp of our usual linear or monocular thinking. He can't just say linear. He has to say monocular. Okay. The more human minds there are, the more dimensions Zarg has. So it's gone quite up a bit since he wrote all of this. In the simplest view, with 4 billion minds, Zarg operates in 4 billion dimensions, as previously mentioned. Each additional mind introduces a new variable or perspective, expanding its dimensional scope. Zarg's multi-consciousness explains the symbolic nature of paranormal and or psychotronic phenomena, e.g. UFOs, apparitions, cryptids, etc. Bearden sees such events as materialized dreams or symbols from Zarg's deeper psyche, with some, like the Petrozavodsk guiding... Son of a bitch. Almost. The Petrozavodsk sighting, serving as warnings or omens in response to geopolitical or psychotronic tensions. He uses this conceptual framework to suggest that the development and usage of psychotronic weapons risks triggering catastrophic energetic and psychological backlash from Zarg. So the Petrozavodsk sighting, whatever. The Petro sighting, that is just a small example of what happens when you poke the bear that is Zarg, is what he's essentially getting at. By embracing both advanced physics and Jungian depth psychology, inextricably intertwined as a discipline, I suppose, we might understand the full implications of our technological and spiritual evolution. The final vision, psychotronics, Zarg, and the destiny of humanity, has to do with the personal unconsciousness and how it can reshape reality. Psychokinesis, poltergeist activity, and similar phenomena prove that individual unconscious minds can alter matter and space-time. Space-time, space-time. When multiple minds are linked, these effects increase exponentially. Process Bearden terms hyperchanneling. Cool, okay. When our powers combine, we are Captain Zarg. Since Zarg is the aggregate of all human minds, 4 billion plus, I assume it's what? It's got to be, I don't even know. It's way beyond that now. Its potential psychokinetic power is virtually limitless. Greater than any single psychic, even Uri Geller. Okay, remember this is written back in the 80s. The implications of this are that Zarg can shift the cosmos, rewrite physical laws, or even tear apart stars. Holy shit. Reality itself is tunable by mass consciousness. What we perceive as stable matter in space-time is merely shared thought among living minds. So we're also sort of inadvertently, holding everything together. We are the glue. We are the stuff that dreams are made of. Or we are the dreams that stuff is made of. Maybe it's the other way around. Therefore, the physical universe equals all mind equals God. Continually reprojected and reinforced by collective belief. Okay, I've seen this concept before. If many minds can, quote-unquote, retune simultaneously, the very fabric of reality can shift. See, and this is why I like this dude's work, because it takes these concepts that you've seen and heard before and frames it in like a... I hate using the word pseudoscientific, but fuck it, we'll just go with scientific. It frames it in a scientific vocabulary, and at the very least. So, yeah. The universe is mind stuff, and psychotronic energy is the medium between mental and material worlds. Bearden references Brian Josephson, who speculated that physicists might create particles through belief and experiment. Maybe we should ask CERN about that. The persistence of theory, combined with accelerators or quote-unquote kindling devices, can summon previously non-existent particles into being. When was CERN built? Like the 90s, right? This happens via Zarg's unconscious mind, energized by collective intent and cognition. The implication is that scientific breakthroughs may not, quote unquote, discover, but generate physical phenomena through a overall psychotronic pressure. Bearden warns of a Soviet attack using massive psychotronic weaponry. Hey, it's, I don't know, Cold War II, Electric Boogaloo, people say it's out there, whatever, I don't know. Doomsayers and whatnots. Too many of them. Everything's going to be fine. Go outside, touch grass, eat a pancake. Destruction of the U.S. and NATO nuclear triads in mere minutes is something that poking and prodding Zarg with Soviet psychotronics could possibly instigate. Submarine implosions, earthquakes, space-based death rays, basically a total psychotronic blitzkrieg. With this attack would act as a quote-unquote mental flashbulb, shocking Zarg into semi-wakefulness, so that Zarg's essential is like the entire collective consciousness of humanity would wake up and be like, So Zarg's response, he posits, would be a psychokinetic cataclysm tearing Eurasia apart, space-time ripped open, stable laws of physics shattered, gone. Dogs and cats living together, ants wearing top hats, activation of higher dimensional reality, and full mental linkage across humanity. So it'd be like awakening into 2012-ish, the ascension is coming, the awakening. The final transformation would be a collective deification of humanity in Zarg's full awakening. Billions of minds link, forming a superconsciousness that is, in fact, a multidimensional God entity. Time collapses. All world histories exist simultaneously, 4-dimensionality. Then all possible histories, 5-dimensionality. Human separation ends, evil vanishes, and there is no other. Okay. I could get down with that. I mean, I don't think it's a pretty way to get there, but this is the second coming, he says, not of an external deity, but of mankind transformed. He reinterprets the book of Revelations as a psychotronic prophecy. This is... okay. He reinterprets the book of Revelations as a psychotronic prophecy foretelling not apocalypse, but ascension via catastrophe. He cites 1 Corinthians 13, suggesting our current reality is quote-unquote childish and partial. The awakening will bring full divine knowledge and unity. His final reflections are on Atlantis, lost chances, and the rise of Zarg. Speculates that Atlantis was destroyed by premature use of psychotronic technologies. Unlike Atlantis, modern humanity is far more globally interconnected, amplifying the coming effect. The communication grid has acted as a neural lattice, gradually stirring Zarg from its slumber. That makes it sound like a Lovecraftian entity that's what I thought when I first heard this. It's still kind of there, too. I don't know. That's one of the other reasons I zoned in on this. If we had developed peaceful mind-linking psychotronics, we could have avoided destruction. Instead, we face an apocalyptic metamorphosis. His final message fuses science, parapsychology, Jungian psychology, and biblical mysticism into a singular prophecy that humanity stands at the edge of ultimate transformation or total annihilation. For the psychotronic resonance of war and technological overreach, we risk waking Zarg, the godlike unconscious super entity that governs reality. But if awakened, Zarg will not just destroy, it will recreate us in divine, multidimensional unity. I can dig it. Sounds scary on the way there, but the destination seems cool. Oh, man. Yeah, this is some of the most, just brain-zapping shit I've read in a long time. I'd like to close out with an article of his from an old school-ass issue of Fortean Times by none other than our dear friend, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Karate Man Tom Bearden.
Ta-da!
You thought everything already mentioned above was maybe just a little bit weird? Then hold on to your butts. All right, so the title of this article is Species Metapsychology, UFOs, and Cattle Mutilations by Tom Bearden. And there's I don't know what you call it, like a foreword of sorts. There's a foreword, but there's a forward. So double forward. But the first thing is just a little note that says, the following portion of a book by Marshall Grechko was deleted from its English translation at the request of the Soviet Union. Quote, of particular importance is basic research aimed at discovering still unknown attributes of matter for their study and use to reinforce the state's defense capabilities. Okay. I don't know who Marshall Grechko is, but I'm assuming that this was something they maybe worked on and they had to remove Bearden's assessments of things, or they just didn't want the English translations in the West to be a little too revealing, I'm assuming. So, forward. For some years, it has been increasingly apparent that UFO phenomena can be explained as temporary, materialized archetypes from the collective human unconscious. Archetypes which are overlaid, filtered, modulated, altered, and shaped by the shallower levels of unconsciousness above the collective species unconsciousness. These shallower layers must be traveled by the archetypal form on its way to physical materialization and conscious observation. A UFO event involves one or more archetypes which are triggered into full or partial materialization, but whose reality formats appearing in the final materialization are determined by the shallower layers of unconsciousness's plumbing, quote unquote, through which it passes. E.g., it is well known in parapsychology that the personal unconscious of an individual can sometimes exert appreciable physical effects on the physical world. The poltergeist phenomena is one direct example. Since the collective species unconscious is vastly more powerful than a single personal unconscious layer of itself, the effect it can exert on the physical world must be very powerful indeed. So from what we already know in parapsychology, it would appear possible for the collective unconsciousness to powerfully affect physical reality, even to the point of materializing thought forms into actual living existence, and possibly even to the point of materializing living beings, aliens, cryptids, etc. But since no physics to describe mind has existed, then no physical theory to describe such drastic interaction of the collective mind upon matter has existed. However, the researcher has devoted considerable effort over the last 13 years to model mind and matter and the entire process of their interactions in terms of a new physics. Nothing less than a new physics, ladies and gentlemen. Some success has been achieved, and within the last 6 years, a series of papers sketching out the model and the physics to describe it have been published. But if this new model is valid, then one ought to be able to directly psychoanalyze the UFO phenomena and gain a deep insight, and the process should be very similar to dream interpretation routinely accomplished by psychotherapists. However, just as the dream pop-outs, quote-unquote dream pop-outs, from an individual's personal unconscious from an individual's unconscious into his conscious awareness symbolically reveals the pressure and conflict within that personal unconscious, then the tolpoid, there's that word again, materializes. The tolpoid materialization phenomena generated by the collective species unconscious should reveal the pressure and conflict within the collective species unconscious. Boy, the word unconscious, it's in here a lot. So a parapsychological extension of Jungian psychology is directly indicated. Were we a wiser and more enlightened nation, we would already have established and developed such a metapsychology or metapsychiatry to assist us in our dealings with other nations. Not a bad idea. I think Arthur C. Clarke maybe wrote a book, Isaac Asimov, something kind of like that. At any rate, since none of the new metapsychologists or metapsychiatrists seem to have developed, then perhaps an amateur effort is warranted to indicate the new path, its direction, and its usefulness. This author, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Karate Man Tom Bearden, Admittedly, an amateur in psychology has made such an effort, and this paper represents a brief condensation of the quite startling results obtained. In preparing the reader for the drastic nature of these results, sorry, I know a little bit of what's coming around the corner. It must be emphasized that the major pressure exerted on the human species since World War II has been due to the conflict between the Western aligned nations and the Soviet bloc. So in the metapsychiatry of the collective species unconscious, the tulpoid materialization phenomena must directly exhibit strong symbolic aspects of this present quote-unquote Cold War mental and emotional conflict of the species as a dominating effect, and so, in fact, it does. In particular, each major UFO wave must be directly connected with a peaking of the Cold War pressure in the collective unconscious, and it is. One of the most bizarre and unexpected aspects which emerges is a startling but quite specific explanation for the cattle mutilations that have occurred across the U.S. in the last several years. Even more horrifyingly, a direct prediction is indicated from the analysis. That prediction is that the Soviet Union is preparing to attack the West and China in the near future, and the last metapsychiatric symptom or indicator to be expected prior to that attack is a series of paranormal mutilations of human females in the U.S. and perhaps in a few associated countries as well. As these words are written, a candidate for the first such female mutilation may have already occurred near Boston, Massachusetts in May 1977. If indeed so, then the moment of truth for the West is imminent, and more such appalling cases are to appear in the immediate future. I do not know what case he is referring to. I've looked into most of the human mutilation, quote-unquote, by aliens, allegedly, cases. There's not a lot. But I've never heard of one with a woman. They've all been men, soldiers, unnamed people, guy from Brazil. In science, a researcher strives to remain unemotionally involved, unattached, and unbiased. But in any research directly involving human beings, there is always a point at which scientific detachment must yield to human consideration. And this metapsychiatric analysis is such a point, beyond all question, for this researcher. The pen, the heart, and the hand that write these words are deeply shaken. The first time in 13 years of unrelenting effort, I fervently pray that my insights and analysis might be proved totally in error. Well, Tom, you got lucky, I guess. I don't know. To continue, there is a distinct possibility that this author may have solved the UFO phenomena, and in fact, Fortean phenomena and paranormal phenomena of all types as well. The key, however, has been found in a most unexpected place. It is necessary to make a formal change in addition to Aristotle's 3 laws of logical thought, and then the solution can proceed. 1. Further, it turns out that the entire matter can be fitted into a perfectly good, albeit fantastically strange, physics written by Everett at Princeton University under John Wheeler in 1957. 2. And that makes it totally consistent with the entire experimental basis of present physics. From this approach, the solutions to the problem of mind and the classic mind/body problem emerge. A mind can be modeled as a physical 4 space, I assume he means 4D space, which shares the same time dimension as the laboratory 4 space, but one whose 3-dimensional, spatial frame is 3 or more orthogonal turns away. From the laboratory 3-dimensional spatial frame in n-dimensional space or nth-dimensional space, i.e. in an infinite set of orthogonal 3 spaces which all share the same time dimension in common. All 3 space frames, 3 or more ortho turns away from the lab 3 space, are mind frames or mind worlds. In this model, a thought form is physically real, but just in a separate world 3 or more orthogonal rotations away from this physical world. The thought form is absolutely concrete in its own realm. This includes any thought form, whether of an inert object, a living biological system, or an abstract structure. Tulpas, thought forms which can, under certain circumstances, ortho-rotate several times and appear or materialize, quote-unquote, in the ordinary laboratory 3 space, thus encompasses anything at all that can be thought. Dragons, fairies, Sasquatches, Nessies, inert objects, ships, craft, Virgin Marys, demons, gods, angels, UFOs, monsters, etc. Okay. Now, a tiny amount of crosstalk exists among all the orthogonal worlds, sharing a common time axis. Further, the time axis, quote unquote, is really more of an oscillating wave. 3. And from the laboratory observer's viewpoint, the other orthogonal worlds exist merely as a tiny, tiny jitter on this time wave carrier. 4, i.e., these orthogonal realities are tiny modulations riding on the time-dimensional carrier wave. Normally, the magnitude of these modulations is so small as to fall below the quantum threshold of measurable/detectable change, so the orthogonal realities are virtual with respect to the laboratory observer. Is everyone following along? I'm predominantly... He's using a lot of $10 words, but I think I got what he's going for. This might be a little late, but just to throw this out there. Orthogonal. Dictionary definition. Of or involving right angles, at right angles, or in statistics, of variates. Statistically independent. Of an experiment having variates which can be treated as statistically independent. Hope that helps. Didn't help me any. However, in ordinary time, coherence to one of the orthogonal forms is established in a large number of coherent stages in the laboratory frame, then the virtual phases for the coherent form increase or multiply in an exponential function of the number of stages cohered. If this is done for a sufficient number of stages, then the virtual coherent forms are exponentially superposing, reach and breach the quantum threshold, turning into observable change and quote-unquote materializing, i.e., quite automatic ortho-rotation back towards this physical frame ensues because quantums. Whenever sufficient multi-stage coherence is established to a thought form in one of the orthogonal worlds. Yeah, okay, I got it. All right. If there are sufficient tuning stages, these stages may be either mental or physical, the superposing form or tulpa rotates all the way back to the laboratory frame and appears there in physically materialized reality. Okay, right. If there is only sufficient tuning stages to rotate it to within one orthogonal turn away, that is the quote-unquote electromagnetic field frame, and the tulpa is seen as just a glowing light form. When the tuning starts becoming unstable, the tulpa starts turning away or to dematerialize. So all sorts of phenomena result. Fairies, to a culture which is soaked in belief in fairies down into enough unconscious levels, devils, imps, angels, god forms, Sasquatches, skunk men? I think you mean skunk apes, but skunk men, that's a new one. Okay. Skunk men, Nessies, etc. In a previous dark age, when everyone believed in devils, occasionally one was met. When satanic possession was widely believed in, it sometimes happened. This type of tuned reality is not quite yet vanished. No shit. The persons in the Dark Ages who feared witchcraft and demons had something behind their fears. They unconsciously were evoking the realities they feared. Okay, when the ancient Jewish tribes believed in a strong father/king type of male god, one that was spiteful, vengeful, jealous, and which must be continually placated with sacrifices, pleading, and whining, then that is the type of god figure they evoked. Similarly, with other religious beliefs. An example of a tulpa which is being tuned in more and more frequently is Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah, the more intense interest there is, the more photos that are taken, and the more investigation that is done, the easier it is to find evidence of Nessie because the additional infiltration of the material and the thought form into more and more unconsciousnesses provides more and more tuning stages and tuning stabilization of a materialized tulpa in an exponential function in the number of tuning stages and the degree of coherence or sameness attained by the stages. It appears that Nessie is on the way to being permanently tuned in. A family of plesiosaurs is going to wind up living in Loch Ness, whether or not there is enough fish in the loch to support them. The past will just be changed to accommodate it accordingly. Holy shit. Okay. Rewriting space-time and history. All possible realities exist and are concretely real, but are just normally compressed to the virtual state by successive orthogonal rotation away from the laboratory 3 space. From a number of quote-unquote states of the future, one can be selectively quote-unquote tuned in if enough coherent minds or physical stages are involved. Any future at all, even the wildest and most implausible and least possible, can be tuned in. And the tuning effect increases exponentially, not linearly or monocularly, as you said earlier, as a function of the number of tuners. So basically, we can program reality, but this is the scientific basis behind it, I'm assuming. Once again, scientific language. The same mechanism is what causes or initiates the radioactive decay of a specific nucleus. Thus, the frequent association of Geiger counter activity with Fortean phenomena or UFO phenomena. Further, rotation towards the laboratory frame causes the tulpa to pass first into and through the world frame that is just one turn away. That is the electromagnetic field when approaching the lab frame from one direction. It's a sort of quote-unquote negative electromagnetic field when approaching the lab frame from other directions. Coming in from one direction, one thus gets glowing light forms and electromagnetic radiation, and then finally the quote-unquote light object solidifies into a three-dimensional physical object. Then, as the turn away from the lab world frame is made, the object first turns into glowing light, one turn away, and then disappears 2 or more turns away. Or, on the other hand, turning away from the lab world frame in the other object, then disappears. Further, when a turn past the first ortho turn is being made, the light object or dark object generates de Broglie waves. Don't know. I.e., it is turning into pure de Broglie waves. Okay, that's what he said already. This electromagnetic field frame from the frame one ortho turn away from the laboratory world frame constitutes a quote-unquote wipeout of the electromagnetic field, including the virtual photons that generate the actual charge of an electron flowing free in an electromagnetic circuit. Hence, the association of the phenomena with the conking out, his words, not mine, with the conking out of electrical and electromagnetic equipment, such as autolights, radios during UFO encounters, communications, etc., exploding TVs, if you will, etc., without really doing any permanent damage. Well, exploding TVs outside of that. All that happens is that essentially the electrons flowing in the circuitry have their quote-unquote charge directly dissolved, and magnetic fields get quote-unquote canceled. When the tulpoid rotates on through the second orthogonal turn, the effect is gone, electrons resume, flowing in the circuits, magnetic fields resume, and everything is back to normal again. Hunky-dory, Punky Brewster. The same effect is evidenced in the human body, where the current quenching quote-unquote effects affect the electrical functions of the nervous system, i.e., if one gets a little bit of the current quenching effect, it is rather like a mind whiff of anesthesia. One has a very unreal, dreamy feeling, but is still conscious and still mobile. If one gets a heavier whiff, then one has a heavily unreal, hypnagogic feeling, and the single-channel nervous functions are electrically disrupted, and then in parentheses, circuit currents blinked, so that the individual is paralyzed. The single-channel system is primarily the nervous system controlling the voluntary muscular system. Get a heavier dose than that, and the multi-channel systems start to go. Here, consciousness is lost. The autonomic nervous system, however, is managing to function with difficulty, so the individual is still gaspingly breathing, and his heart is still beating with difficulty. Get a stronger dose even yet, and everything blanks out electrically, and death ensues. So basically, he's talking about the effects that people feel in an abduction scenario, usually. Aliens will, it's as if they inadvertently exert some kind of whammy, some whammy force on you, and like you're not thinking right, or you feel like you're in an altered state of consciousness, essentially. Since UFO phenomena are unconscious mental forms which are materializing to reality, one can directly psychoanalyze the phenomenon if one is careful to add in the greater effects which are involved at the various levels of unconsciousness and pressing on them. So let us examine the phenomena from that aspect. My God. Okay. If this is, I believe this is where things take a bit of a turn. During World War II, Stalin laid plans to attack the West with about 2 years after the end of the war. He knew that when the war was finished, the quote-unquote decadent capitalists would immediately beat their swords into plowshares and disman and disarm, for they had always done so after each war. All he had to do was hold his forces ready and wait for this to occur, then take Europe in 6 weeks. Okay? However, the advent of the atomic bomb frustrated this plan. He could no longer mass his forces, for American bombers loaded with atomic bombs could have simply obliterated them. Consequently, he had to change the plan and the time schedule. During 1946 and 1947, the communists were intensively revising the master plan, quote-unquote master plan, and hatching the plans for a global Cold War, rescheduling an eventual attack and takeover with a long-range, worldwide strategic plan. So during this time, a great deal of threat stress, quite heavy pressure, was pressing down into the unconsciousness of a large number of Soviet communists. This constituted a heavy pressure on the collective unconsciousness of all humanity at a deeper level yet, and so in the other parts of the collective unconscious, pop-outs, aka tulpoid forms, i.e. archetypal unconsciousness above the species consciousness, archetypal, whatever, tulpoids. The racial unconsciousness, the national cultural unconsciousness, large subgroup unconsciousness, group unconsciousness, personal unconsciousness, all the subdivisions of the unconsciousness. These successive layers modulate and shape the pattern of reality that is pushing up, much like the different frequencies add together in Fourier analysis, don't know what that is, to compose the, I'm not going to lie, to compose the final form that emerges. Let us pause a moment to analyze some factors bearing on these reality modulations / shapings that are occurring. The human unconscious is deepest ingrained with the experience of the ancient jungle days of millions of years ago, not recent history. In the human, quote-unquote, old experience that is in our genes, the male went where the threat / action was, while the female stayed behind in the cave / fortress with the children protected. Also, in the primates, the erect penis is a sign of domination. It's going to get real Freudian. I.e., dominant monkeys erect and mount, quote-unquote, other male monkeys to show dominance. Okay? The erect mid-finger is still a hostile gesture and one of domination. Further, there is the power symbol to the collective consciousness. Fire was power over animal adversaries, for it kept the tigers at bay. So all the threat saturation, quote-unquote, threat saturation by the Soviets in 1946 and 47 ought to give a male penis symbol, include the fire symbol, etc., in adjacent areas. Power and domination. Further, into the unconsciousness of many persons, cultural and national unconsciousness has seeped deeply the German use of rockets, male penis / fire domination / powers of symbol or power symbols in World War II. Use of these weapons had fired the imagination of the free world. So in 1946/47, the erect penis / fire symbol for dominance, threat, and power ought to pop out where the action is, i.e. closest to the threat of war threatening, or a war threatening agent or zone. Bingo! Ghost rockets in the countries next to the Soviet Union, i.e. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, etc. But the U.S. is a natural fortress, or so it had always been. 2 great ocean barriers, east and west, and no strong enemy north or south. That corresponds to the cave / fortress, protected place, and thus a female symbol should result there. Bingo, Kenneth Arnold, and he's saying bingo, not me. Bingo, Kenneth Arnold, flying over Washington State, the closest state at the time to the Soviet Union in 1947, sees flying saucers, which are simply female mandalas modulated by our sci-fi / Buck Rogers / flying aircraft national cultural unconsciousness. It's tits. He's saying that UFOs are tits. And probably the sickle on the goddamn communist flag is something to do with castration. I'm sure it's going to come up. Arnold's personal unconsciousness, the last modulation and shaper of the reality format that emerged, is that of a pilot. So flying saucers are what appeared over the U.S. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War occurred. That was the Soviets' Spanish Civil War, where the final tactics and equipment for anti-tank and anti-aircraft weaponry were tested. The effects on the U.S. and NATO of the cutoff of Arab oil was tested. Further, when the Israelis at one point succeeded in cutting off an Egyptian army, Brezhnev telephoned the U.S. president and informed him that the Soviets were going in. The U.S. could do whatever it pleased. The Soviets had 7 airborne divisions ready to send in, and the U.S. had its single airborne division on full alert, ready for insertion. Insertion. Boy. Okay, so the world teetered on the brink of direct confrontation between the Soviet Union and the U.S. with all its possible consequences. And quote-unquote confrontation is, after all, another word for contact. True. Okay. Now, UFO contactee cases involve confrontation in the very month, October, that the Yom Kippur War erupted. The greatest wave of UFO contactee cases in history broke out in the U.S. Further, in the shallower unconscious levels above the collective species unconscious, which were modulating and molding the reality formats, the imagination of the world had been captured by the spacesuited astronauts who had walked on the moon. So most U.S. contactee cases involve spacesuited beings conditioned into the framework by the national/cultural modulation. Some of the contactee cases involved robots or metallic men, analogous to the mechanization and robotry. Robotry? Is that a word? Robotry of the U.S. space program. And here in the U.S., the Fortress, the female Mandela craft symbol, was generally maintained. Within the last... God, this is insane. Within the last several years, a rather fantastic number of paranormal catamulations have occurred across the midsection of the U.S. A peak has apparently been centered in and around Colorado, the home of Cheyenne Mountain, in whose bosom the quote-unquote heart or control center for the strategic retaliatory forces of the U.S. is nestled. This is significant, for it is the heart, quote-unquote, of the U.S., which is to be slashed and eviscerated in the Soviet plan. But to explain the cattle mutilations, some additional factors must be developed. When checked in his plan to attack by the advent of the atomic bomb at the close of World War II, Stalin called in his scientists and told them the destiny of communism had been frustrated by this great U.S. technical breakthrough. Further, this would not be the last great breakthrough. However, he informed them in no uncertain terms that the next great breakthrough of that magnitude had better be Soviet in origin, or you'll be sorry. Thus, they were to follow every field in human knowledge, no matter how strange or unorthodox, and intensely search for such another field of breakthrough. No stone was to be left unturned in this search. Once the field was discovered, they would intensely develop superweapons in secret, just as the U.S. had done, and spring them by surprise on the West, just as the U.S. had done on Japan. Ironically, we had showed Stalin the scenario by means of which the West could eventually be overcome. Okay. In the interim, the guerrilla tactics of terrorism and insurgency and unrelenting pressure that had proven so successful in the Russian Revolution were to be launched around the world on an international. I'm assuming some of this is blotted out. International scale. In all continents, small conventional wars would bleed the U.S. dragon. Ooh. And weaken it. I thought we were a sleeping tiger. The Soviet Union would also embark on a massive crash program to establish defense weapons and jet aircraft the Germans had so brilliantly demonstrated in World War II. So in 1947, this guy, people are always so, I don't know, singing the high praises of Germans in World War II. It's weird. So in 1947, the Cold War was launched, and the Soviet path to eventual world domination was clearly spelled out. The reader is assumed to be familiar with the major events of the Cold War since then, sure, and it is stressed that since about 1972, the Soviets have greatly accelerated their procurement and stockage of new arms and equipment, and the Soviet production of war material has risen to feverish levels, not reached by any other nation since Adolf Hitler's production peak just prior to his initiation of World War II. In 1957, Everett's Many Worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics was published by Princeton University. If one meticulously examines this theory, and if one regards a mental object as just an ordinary physical object whose time dimension is synonymous with the time dimension of ordinary physical objects, but whose spatial dimensions do not intersect spatially with the spatial dimensions of ordinary objects, then one realizes that minds are just ordinary physical worlds 3 or more orthogonal spatial turns away from the ordinary laboratory 3 space and cotemporal with it, i.e., sharing the same time dimension. This is particularly likely to be noticed if one has the dialectical method, a slightly confused way of stating the author's fourth law of logic, deeply ingrained in his thinking. Bingo! The Soviet theoreticians made the connection. So in 1960, Khrushchev, speaking to the Presidium, to the leaders of the Communist Party, not for propaganda, stated at the conclusion of his report that the Soviet Union had a new weapon just within the portfolio of the scientists, which was so powerful that, if unrestrainedly used, it could wipe out all life on Earth, i.e., intensive psychotronic, psychoenergetic weapons development was underway in the Soviet Union. Oh man, okay, so, we're not even close to done. At about the same time, complex, weak microwave radiation of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow began. So, let's say it's a precursor and prototype to Havana syndrome, essentially. The purpose was to modulate psychotronic signals onto weak RF carriers and hit a high-level U.S. target, the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union. This would guarantee the personal attention of the U.S. President, CIA, DIA, NSA, State Department, National Security Council, etc. A few blood changes and diseases would be introduced as a red herring by the U.S.'s response. You know what? I think Mae Brussel may have covered some of this stuff as well. By the U.S.'s response to the radiation stimulus, the state of U.S. knowledge of the new breakthrough area, aka psychotronics, could be positively ascertained because the decision for the response would come from the highest levels in the U.S. government. If the U.S. reacted only to the electromagnetic component, it would show with 100% certainty that the U.S. knew nothing of psychotronics and hence had not developed psychotronic superweapons in secret. If the U.S. reacted to the psychotronic modulation, it would show that the U.S. possessed a knowledge of psychotronics, and the specific type of reaction would indicate the sophistication of that knowledge, hence the probable nature of weaponry they might have developed. Since the beginning of this radiation of the U.S. Embassy, we have been reassuring the Soviets we know nothing about the mechanism for their new superweapons. Just how vital this strange intelligence probe is to the Soviet Union can be ascertained from the fact that 3 American presidents have asked them to stop the radiation, but they have not done so, merely reducing the power level to a seemingly insignificant level. Khrushchev, ever the ebullient peasant, thrown shade, quickly attempted to move strategic rocket weapons into Cuba and immediately changed the balance of power before his new superweapons were operationally deployed. In 1962, the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis was thus caught him out. God damn it. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis thus caught him without his new superweapons and with his missiles in woeful operational shape. Hence, he simply had to back down. About 1963, the first Soviet superweapons became operational. Today, third-generation superweapons are probably deployed and ready. Ironically, in psychotronic devices, the flow or background of orthorotational flux in which coherence is multi-stagedly established must be relatively uniform for the coherence to be maintained, i.e., in weapons, this is necessary for the superweapons to work. Occasionally, for random intervals of from 15 minutes or so to a day or two, turbulent flux is encountered. All of a given type case work simultaneously, and all resume again together, something totally different from any normal weapon system failure mode. Hence, the superweapons cannot be absolutely depended upon for the primary effectors, but are best used as a backdrop with mind-stunning shock and devastation, just as the U.S. used its 2 atomic bombs on Japan in World War II. Sounds a little different. Not gonna lie. Bombs are pretty much good to go. I don't think they need a 15 minutes to 2 day rest period. One and done. That's about it. So for that reason, the Soviet buildup in conventional and nuclear arms has aimed at overwhelming strength in those categories, even though the superweapons exist and are deployed and ready. The greatest armada of weaponry in history has continued to steadily be built up by the Soviet Union. The attack operation is poised and ready. A lightning blow of unprecedented ferocity and speed, followed by a massive, mind-paralyzing, awesome demonstration of devastation by the superweapons, is imminent. Remember 1997 when we got attacked by the psychotronic superweapons? I don't know. Nothing devastating. I don't remember that. The plan is simple and three-phased. 1. Secure the Eurasian continent by defeating NATO and annihilating Red China, ejecting the U.S. presence and taking over Europe. This requires 3 to 6 days. In the process, just as the U.S. president is contemplating full nuclear strategic retaliation, say after 50% casualties in NATO in the first 3 days, a ground advance of 250 kilometers, seizure of total air superiority in the first several hours, an unrelenting and merciless air attack has devastated critical installations, supplies, centers, and forces throughout the NATO rear. The psychotronic weapons will be unleashed in a mind-bending, terrible demonstration that will totally paralyze the West, just as 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki paralyzed a fanatical Japan in World War II. 2. Split the American continent in two, seizing South America and the Panama Canal. The Cubans are the stars of this show. This is why they have been involved in about 11 or so countries to gain experiences. Angola was the dress rehearsal for the Cuban forces. Henry Kissinger, Angola, a lot of fucked up. Just look at it. After the U.S. has collapsed in total chaos and economic... 3. This is number 3. After the U.S. has collapsed in total chaos and economic destitution, Soviet forces simply march in to restore order. Hey, welcome the conquering heroes. Now, if all this unbelievable scenario has any validity, then after the final rehearsal, i.e. after the 1973 Mideast War, one ought to see an increase in the tulpoid phenomena of a sharply symbolic nature which can be appropriately psychoanalyzed, and so it has happened, and so one can. The cow. Okay. This is the cherry on top. The cow is in the Western female symbol par excellence in the Western unconsciousness. Western children nurse on cow's milk. So if the fortress is going to be violated, then one ought to see the female symbol being violated. Jesus. So cattle mutilations of a mysterious paranormal nature have been occurring all across the U.S. From the East Coast out throughout Colorado, Utah, and Montana, about 2,000 or so by now. The U.S.'s lifeblood is going to be drained, and totally. Thus all this blood is drained from the cattle. The Soviet operation will be launched with blinding speed and surgical precision, and so the mutilation of the cattle is if surgically performed. What? He weirds this word. The Soviet operation will be launched with blinding speed and surgical precision, and so the mutilation of the cattle is as if surgically performed. The children of the West shall be cut off from their sustenances, and so teats are removed. The armed forces, males, confronting the Soviet forces will be devastated, i.e. the fruit of the womb will be devastated. So the sexual organs of the cows are excised. Free speech and freedom to hear will be excised, so the lips, tongues, and ears are excised. A very high technology will play a role, but one which will limit the resistance. So the cut edges are as if made by pinking shears and then precisely burned with a laser being highly symbolic of new strange technology / weaponry, almost incomprehensible to the average person. I think we know what lasers are, bro. Chill out. God damn. In at least one case, a horse was the victim, a young horse, symbolic of the young soldier. It was castrated, i.e., the dominance of the Western soldier will be excised surgically. Castration of the male symbolizes the total loss of power and the infliction of absolute impotency.
And unless we shut it down, it's gonna rip our dicks right off!
There is even more meaning available to be read in the animal mutilations, but this sample should suffice to give a blood-curdling example of the metapsychiatric analysis results. But yet, a final shock awaits, so you don't say. Just prior to the actual Soviet attack against NATO, the tulpoid symbology should be raised to the highest possible degree, and there would seem to be only one additional degree higher than the mutilation of the cow. That is the sexual mutilation of the... that is the sexual mutilation of the human lady. So in horror, one realizes that the model predicts the raising of the cattle mutilation symbology to a rash or wave of human female mutilations. This first such incident may have already occurred in May 1977. A strange, horrible sexual mutilation of a human female occurred in the greater Boston area. I don't know if he's talking about crime or if this is like something with aliens. Anyway, okay. In paranormal phenomenon, the inadvertent or forced raising of the kundalini often invokes a paroxysm of insanity. Got the kundalini involved now. The raising of the kundalini of the entire human species seems now to be underway, and a drastic forcing of it seems to be at hand. The final agony of the birth of man, or of his death, has begun. Holy shit. Now, this is either one of the most, I don't know, completely insane, or I won't say brilliant, but it's quite the mashup of scientific disciplines. Just the whole Freudian analysis of Cold War ufology, I thought was quite special. Something very much a product of his time. But yeah, I wanted to give a fairly decent introduction to Tom Bearden. I'm probably going to come back to this dude because he's got like way more material, and once again, I know science very well. So I'm going to try and get into it a little deeper, and I hope it doesn't make me stupider. But I don't know, there are certain elements of this that I think have bearing on how we might approach ufology in the future. Mostly the metapsychological range, narratives, etc. Also just, I don't know, it's the tulpoidal generation thing, and just psychokinetics and psychoenergetics and psychotronics. The whole mind induction of the phenomena aspect of it all is very interesting to me. I've never seen anyone really lay it out in scientific terms. I hesitate to say scientifically, but at least scientific terms. But yeah, that's Lieutenant Colonel, quote-unquote, Dr. Karate Man, Tom Bearden. Look into him. You may be hearing about him more in the future. Not from me necessarily, but I don't know. He's all over the place with like crazy physics and weird science and high strangeness. So, yep. That's going to be it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. And I know it's a lot of reading, but it is just, we like to bring the kooky. And that's the way the kooky crumbles. I'm Mike Lucht, Warrior Poet, and this is Kooks, Pranks, and Iconoclasts. I'm probably going to kick out a small bonus episode maybe this week, and then hopefully next week, if everything goes according to plan, be in the studio with the fellas. Hadn't had them around in a while, so that should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for listening. Appreciate you guys. Love you. Take care of yourselves, and watch out for the Soviet psychotronics. Peace out.
And unless we shut it down, it's gonna rip our dicks right off!